Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation, the show dedicated to discussing the differences between film adaptations and the books they're based on. You guys are going to need to get comfy for this one because it takes a little explaining. Before we go any further, I need to impress upon you the usual spoiler warning, but also a more serious than usual warning of graphic content. This is an R-rated movie and therefore some of the images and points of discussion I'm about to review are as well. We're talking gore and themes of a sexual nature. Nightbreed is one of the more unique adaptations I've ever covered on this show because amazingly, the original author, screenwriter and director are all the same person. I think the last time I saw the same name in so many credits I was watching The Room. Clive Barker is a British novelist who grew up in Merseyside, the same place as yours truly as it happens. He's had an incredibly long career as a horror writer and on many occasions was more involved in the film adaptations of his work than your average author, the most famous of which being the 1987 horror classic Hellraiser. 3 years after that came Nightbreed, based on his short novel Cabal. Alas, in this case, being in charge of so many different aspects of the adaptation isn't the same thing as having complete creative control, and by all accounts Barker faced more than his fair share of the dreaded studio interference from the film's distribution company, 20th Century Fox. Some of it was most definitely bullshit, like their insistence on changing the film's name, marketing what was supposed to be a dark, suspenseful horror drama as a slasher movie, an over-reliance on test groups to dictate huge plot decisions, including the ending, and despite the reasonable to good success of the gorefest that was Hellraiser, they also forced Barker to aim for an R rating, so he had to tone down a lot of his visual effects. Other things were arguably more reasonable, as apparently Barker's original cut of the film was 2.5 hours long, and the editor was allegedly so protective of it he quit the film rather than reduce its length. So, after some delays, a misleading marketing campaign and a fuck-ton of corporate bullying, a roughly 100-minute version of the film with a distinctly different ending to the novel was released in cinemas and, shockingly, promptly bombed, not even making back the production costs in the box office. Well done, Fox. About 20 years later, Barker's own production company found out that most of the original footage they shot was still intact, and a director's cut was put together and shown at several film festivals, which reawakened enough interest in the film online that a few years later it was released on DVD and Blu-ray. I had to explain all of this because the patron who generously paid for this episode specifically requested that this director's cut be the subject of comparison, not the disappointing theatrical release that I usually would have insisted on sticking to. Now that might make you wonder if there's any point in me reviewing this, because surely Barker's ideal version of the film would have stayed too loyal to his original novel to make it worth talking about on Lost in Adaptation. Well, surprisingly, there is still quite a lot to discuss here, but before we do that, let's talk about the book and the film as individuals. I would describe Cabal as a cross between a H.P. Lovecraft and a Stephen King book, mostly but not completely in a positive way, as it embodies a lot of those writers' flaws as well as their strengths. Bear in mind though that I've not read the complete works of Lovecraft, King, or Barker, so I'm probably talking out of my arse here. There is a distinct touch of genius in the way he writes, the descriptors he uses to create an atmospheric tone, his way of making what would otherwise seem comical utterly serious, and, most of all, his ability to describe the fear his characters feel in moments of distress, and maybe even install a little bit of it in the reader. However, there's also the occasional moment when he writes something so awkward, off-putting and weird, it undoes a lot of the suspense he was just building up, and you're left feeling uncomfortable and confused. Trust me, I will cite an example of this before the end of the review. So fuck yeah, if you like horror novels, and especially if you like Lovecraft and King, give this guy a go. Right, let's talk about that version of the film that ended up being so long in the making. You can tell right away that directing isn't Barker's primary profession, but he has had some experience doing it, because everything in this movie is okay. Not great, but competently shot for the most part. Yeah, fuck off, Claymation! Sorry, I still haven't overcome that particular inexplicable phobia. I noticed this film seems to waste hard work quite a lot, masks and practical effects that I assume must have been the end result of thousands of dollars and hours in the makeup chair or on screen for maybe a second, then never seen again. Though, now that I think about it, if Fingered Chin Girl here is anything to go by, maybe that was to hide just how terrible some of them were. Speaking of looking terrible, oh yes, I totally believe this is a real thing. I am looking at a graveyard that's definitely not a painting. Oh, the 80s. Yeah, I know it was technically the 90s, but it still counts. This film never wasted an opportunity to get Craig Sheffer's shirt off. Thanks, I guess? Okay, so this is a joke that's probably only going to make sense to my British audience, but holy crap, I couldn't stop thinking this character reminded me of Dr. Statham from Green Wing. FYI, everyone should totally watch Green Wing now and thank me later. I think the makers of this film forgot that being R-rated meant they could show boobs, because there's no boobs until right near the end, then suddenly there's boobs for little to no reason. Speaking of boobs, I think this film overestimated how sexy we would find a half-girl, half-porcupine, but I don't know, the internet's here now, so there's undoubtedly someone fapping to this out there somewhere. Sorry, I know I'm reaching for stuff to mention here. A lot of what I want to talk about film-wise is actually tied into the adaptation review for once, so let's just skip to that. I would have been utterly shocked if the plot of the director's cut of the film didn't follow the book like mad, and fortunately my sensitive little mind remains unshocked for the time being. Despite how few people in the survey have read it, a synopsis of the book is not required here because a description of the film is basically the same thing. Boone, a handsome young leather-jacketed man in a happy relationship with his girlfriend Laurie, battles with constant mental health problems that have required him to regularly see a therapist by the name of Deckard over the last few years. With Deckard and Laurie's help, Boone was under the impression he was getting better, but one day Deckard informs him that there have been a huge string of murders going on in the city they live in, and believes that Boone may have confessed to him under hypnosis that he had been committing them and then erasing it from his memory. Overcome with guilt and horror, Boone cuts it off with Laurie and attempts suicide by truck, only succeeding however in injuring himself. While recovering in hospital, he meets a seemingly deranged man named Narcissus, who tells him of a magical city named Midian filled with monsters where even the most wretched person can be forgiven their sins and find a place to live. Mistaking in his delirium Boone for an emissary of Midian, Narcissus attempts to prove his commitment to joining them by mutilating his own face with razor blades attached to his thumbs. In the resulting pandemonium, Boone escapes the hospital and decides to seek out Midian for himself. The directions that Narcissus gave him lead him to an ancient cemetery in the middle of nowhere, and all this insanity is proven suddenly justified that night when he's pounced on by two genuine monsters who refer to themselves as the Nightbreed. Boone asks for sanctuary in Midian, stating that he's killed so many people he must be a monster too, but one of them tells him that he can tell he's just an innocent, regular human and therefore their food, taking a huge bite out of his flesh. The other Nightbreed seems more merciful and helps Boone escape, only for him to be almost immediately confronted by Deckard and a battalion of armed police who fill him full of enough lead to kill a rhino. Grieving for his death, and especially upset when she's told his body has vanished shortly later, Laurie attempts to retrace Boone's final movements in the hopes of gaining some insight into how the seemingly gentle man she knew could secretly have been the serial killer she's been told he was. Along the way, she's comforted and befriended by a random woman named Cheryl who offers to help her with her quest. Together, they travel towards Midian and stay in a hotel in the nearby town, where Cheryl becomes immediately distracted by a banker named Curtis who she falls hard for. While investigating the graveyard, Laurie comes across a small, strange, cat-like creature apparently paralyzed by sunlight. A woman hiding in the darkness of a mausoleum begs her to bring the beast to her in the shadows, which Laurie does, and is shocked and horrified when the monster transforms into a toddler right before her eyes. Grateful to her, the child's mother hints about knowing something about Boone's fate, but another Nightbreed turns up and forbids any more information being given out. Laurie tries to pursue them underground, but is frightened off. Shortly later, she finds Cheryl has been murdered, and the mysterious Curtis was actually Deckard, who's been the real killer all along and misused his position as Boone's psychiatrist to make him his scapegoat. Now adorned in a freaky button-eyed mask, he's convinced that Boone is still alive and hopes that by killing Laurie he will flush him out of hiding. His plan is successful, but he didn't count on the revelation that Boone had been infected by the bite he'd received and transformed into an undead Nightbreed, finally taken in by the inhabitants of Midian, but defying their laws to come to his lover's rescue. Boone is distracted from killing Deckard at the last minute by Narcissus, who apparently also died and somehow became a Nightbreed, so the murderous psychiatrist escapes. Boone faces banishment from Midian for potentially exposing them to discovery by the human world, so he goes to appeal to the guy who created it directly, an ancient godlike being called Baphomet.
Baphomet made Midian.
I mean, are you sure?
What about Baphomet? Can he be moved?
Just because, I mean, it's spelt Baphomet.
It's Baphomet's will!
Alright, well, the author directed it, so Baphomet it is. This doesn't seem to be going too well, so Laurie rescues him and takes him away. Unfortunately, they don't get far. Laurie swings by the hotel she was staying at and discovers that Deckard got there first and slaughtered everyone in the building. Overwhelmed by the smell of blood and death, Boone is overcome with hunger and transforms into his Nightbreed form to eat the bodies. So engrossed he can't even bring himself to flee with Laurie when the police show up, and he ends up getting blamed for even more murders. Deckard convinces the local police chief, a very unpleasant person called Eigerman, to send some policemen to check out the Midian graveyard, and they discover the breed and realise there's a whole army of them below ground. This is the point in both the novel and the movie where things escalate kind of fast. Eigerman immediately rounds up the police force and everyone else they can find and forms a lynch mob to go and destroy Midian. In case they need divine power, he press gangs a disgraced priest named Ashbury into coming along as well. Meanwhile, Laurie and Narcissus bust Boone out of jail. Boone is hesitant at first, but Laurie convinces him him his undead life is worth living, and they rush back to find Midian under siege. Ashbury is the only one who voices the opinion that maybe they shouldn't murder everyone there, including the women and children, but everyone else seems to be in full mob mentality and keep on at it. Baphomet decides it's time for his children to move to new digs and starts Midian's self-destruct countdown. Boone does what he can to stop the attack, and Decker decides to take the opportunity to kill Laurie, chasing her down through the depths of Midian even as it falls apart. Narcissus tries to intervene and loses his life for his trouble. Fortunately, Boone turns up just in time and manages to finally stop the insane psychiatrist. He goes before Baphomet one last time and is told the deity always knew that Boone was destined to end up destroying Midian, but he's also destined to one day reunite the Nightbreed and find them a new home. Also, he's baptizing him and renaming him Cabal. After that, all the Nightbreed flee the area and scatter to the wind to await their savior, and Cabal prepares to part ways with Laurie to start his quest. However, determined to stay with him forever, she fatally wounds herself, forcing him to bite her and turn her into an immortal Nightbreed too in order to save her. The end, I guess. Both the book and the film have a setting up a larger story sort of feel to them. It would have been difficult for the film to fail to recreate the book's most ham-fisted message, that man is the real monster, as Deckard is so much more vile than any of the denizens of Midian. And of course, of the dozens of people who came to torture Midian, only one guy felt it probably wasn't okay to kill defenseless children just because they looked a bit weird. They also did a good job of recreating Laurie's rather bizarre journey through Midian the first time she goes there, even if I think they leaned on the visual gross-out factor a little heavily at times. Boone's transformation to and from monster form involved him blowing smoke in and out of his mouth, which was a nice book-loyal touch that I imagine most directors wouldn't have bothered with.
There goes the neighborhood.
Okay, as you could probably tell by the sheer bulk of the previous section, the plot is loyal as hell to the book, but for some reason many details could end up being radically different in places, and there's an unmissable tonal shift right from the start. I cannot claim that a book that contains a vivid description of someone cutting his own face off, or a ragdoll gimp mask wearing serial killing doctor is overflowing with subtlety, but what subtlety there was has been completely drained out of the adaptation, and with it a lot of the atmospheric suspense that was a huge selling point of the novel. Just as an example, there's no proof of actual monsters until a good way into the book, and even then there's a distinct possibility that they are nothing more than a figment of Boone's deranged mind, and even when it's confirmed they are real, a lot of them spend a few more chapters hidden in shadows so you have no idea what they really look like. The very first shot of the film after the opening credits are done shows you the Nightbreed in all of their glory. Look! Monsters! Right in your face! Monsters, 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 monsters! There they are! Monsters! Put crudely, the film blows its load right away. After that, it tries to go back to the slow burn tone of the book for a bit, but it's too late. You're just waiting for the monsters to come back, and there's not a particle of shock value left in it when they do. There's also things like Laurie's aborted descent into Midian. In the book, she's driven off by an invisible but overpowering malevolent presence and a deep animalistic fear that installs in her. She also feels an unholy supernatural drag on her. She leaves as if she's already gone too far and the darkness itself is trying to drag her underground to her certain doom. The film's attempt to recreate this involves there being snakes everywhere and a big scary monster that jumps out and yells boo. Another disappointing change is Decker, who I've just realised I've been calling Deckard until now due to my usual idiotic inability to remember or pronounce names right. Fuck. Sorry guys, this guy's name is Decker and he is disappointing, as a character and in the way the film handles his part in the story. First of all, he's supposed to be ripped, a real bodybuilder, something Boone thought was a weird quality in a therapist at first but later found comforting as it made him seem like his rock physically as well as emotionally. It also helped make him more of a convincing threat when he turned out to be the real villain of the story. I must confess, I did not see that twist coming in the book. Barker the novelist does a really good job of convincing the reader that Decker is genuinely trying to help Boone and didn't want to believe he really was a murderer until the truth was overwhelming. Barker the filmmaker makes no such attempt. Decker is creepy as fuck from the second he shows up on screen, and the cinematography and score make sure he never loses that malevolence for even a second. Even the characters seem to pick up on this as Boone runs the fuck away from his friend as he starts Terminator marching down the hospital corridor towards him. Not only does this rob the film of a good twist, as a result it's much harder to see why Boone was so willing to be convinced by this creepy wanker that he's been killing people in his sleep. Despite this, I couldn't help but notice that the film still tried to have a bit of a dun 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 moment when he's finally revealed. It's like, come on dude, there was a shot of you sitting in a room full of death and knives. We know it's you, just keep the mask on for goodness sake. Somewhat amusingly, a change in the film made itself apparent before I even watched it. I took one look at the cover of the DVD case and thought, huh. Those monsters look kind of goofy. That's worrying. Deeming this a change might be a little unfair, as Barker went out of his way to avoid describing a lot of the monsters in any detail in the book, allowing the reader's imagination to fill in the blanks, which of course he then couldn't do in the film, but come on, look at this guy! He's the fucking Moon from the McDonald's commercial! The big guy himself, Baphomet, is also quite different looking between book and film, though fortunately he at least manages to look quite imposing in both. The film went with this messed up looking statue with black skin and what looks like glowing gold organs where the flesh is melted off the body. In the book, Baphomet was a tad more freaky. He took the form of an everlasting blast of fire that erupted from a fissure in the earth and emitted cold instead of heat, inside of which his body parts, cut apart untold years ago by some powerful, terrible enemy, perpetually swirl with chunks of his eviscerated flesh. Yeah, they probably couldn't have recreated that with 1980s film tech. The lack of subtlety and new goofiness also applies to the human characters, but in their behaviour instead of their appearance. In the book, when the humans attack Midian unprovoked and show no mercy to anyone there, it's made clear that with most of them, their actions are based on knee-jerk panic and fear of the unknown, which allowed for, if not approval, at least some understanding of their behaviour. The film did away with this. Almost every human in town virtually salivates at the prospect of killing a whole city of monsters, grinning as they hand out machine guns, laughing as they mow down unarmed opponents, and licking garrote wires in aroused anticipation of using them. We get it. We get it. Man is the real monster. Please move on, film. Actually, joking aside, I think I know exactly why this happened. You see, the film introduces a huge change near the end in that instead of the Nightbreed simply fleeing Midian as soon as the sun went down, Boone rallies them to fight back and they kill pretty much as many humans as the humans killed Nightbreed. I don't have any evidence to back this up, but this has studio interference written all over it. No, you need to end on a big old battle with one-liners and shit, not a one-sided slaughter that makes people feel bad. Despite their initial hesitation to fight, some of the breeds seem to be enjoying it a little too much, to the point where Barker had to make sure the humans seemed even worse by comparison, or his monsters would lose the moral high ground. Boone seems to be in a better place all round at the start of the film. He has a steady job, his hallucinations appear to be confining themselves to the occasional nightmare, and apparently he hasn't been to see Decker in months. In the book, he was very dependent on his regular visits to his therapist to keep it together, which made Decker's ability to convince him he was a killer a lot more believable. The film put all of the visualizations of Boone's mental health issues after Decker talks to him about it, so it kind of looks like he's just really susceptible to suggestion. Laurie goes from having a desk job to being a singer in the film, I'm assuming just as an excuse to have a musical number. In the book, Narcissus cuts off his own face to prove his devotion to Midian. In the film, he cuts off everything except his face, which is amusing, I guess, albeit in an exceptionally morbid way. Detective Joyce, the policeman that Decker manipulates all the way through the story, then eventually kills, is a film original. He seems to mostly be there to look disapprovingly at all the really vile characters when they say horrible things, and hint that he's suspicious of Decker every now and again, but not actually do anything useful. Also unique to the film are the Berserkers, the feral Nightbreed kept locked up in the lower levels of Midian, and the unlucky old redneck man that Decker kidnaps and tortures for information on the Nightbreed. Much like the mishandled reveal of Decker's true nature, the film doesn't follow suit in how the book handled the twist that Boone wasn't really dead. Well, dead in the traditional sense, I mean. Originally, the first time he reappeared in the story is when he came to save Laurie from Decker, but the film not only shows him start to come alive again in the mortuary, it throws away the surprise altogether and shows him up and walking around and being initiated into Midian before his triumphant return. By establishing that he was dreaming of the place, the film sets up some sort of connection between Boone and Midian before he goes there that was absent in the book. Boone had simply heard of the place and wanted to see if it was real. Poor Cheryl's part in the story was condensed and somewhat rushed in the film. She spent a lot more time helping Laurie through the hardest parts of her journey, and she was murdered in the half-burned down abandoned remains of a restaurant back in the human town in the book, as opposed to right outside the Midian graveyard. This raises the question as to why Decker bothered courting her in the first place if he wasn't planning to use her to draw Laurie out to an isolated spot and just followed them there instead. Probably because of the R rating forced on the film by Fox, Boone eating chunks of the dead bodies in the hotel is toned down to him just having just a little taste, just a tiny little lick. It wasn't a cheat day, so he couldn't indulge himself too much. Poor Nihilus is robbed of his reasonably heroic death trying to defend Laurie by being decapitated off-screen in the film. In the film, Ashbury, the priest that gets roped into helping with the attack, is a bit of a dodgy man of the cloth because he's an alcoholic. The sin that he's so desperate to keeps secret in the book is that he's a closet transvestite, apparently having a psychological inability to take off the women's underwear that he wears underneath his outfit. His fate is also different to his book counterpart. Originally, and I personally think a little unfairly considering he didn't seem to be a bad bloke, he was caught in the fiery blast created by Baphomet's destruction of Midian, losing his legs, arms, skin, and sight in the process. In the book's epilogue, after he comes to after months of being in a coma, he seems to have some greater understanding of the Nightbreed and thinks he can track them down, so arsehole McFuckface Police Chief Eigerman, also slightly mad after his experiences, takes custody of him and they form an ominous monster hunting team dedicated to ridding the world of them. In the film, during the attack, he makes his way into Midian to see what Baphomet looks like, gets his magic baptizing juice sprayed in his face, and turned into a Nightbreed himself. When Eigerman tries to team up with him, he just kills him and wanders off. In case you were wondering, the original theatrical cut of the movie ended with Ashbury retrieving Decker's body and bringing it back to life using Baphomet's baptizing liquid. Apparently this was one of the things that tested better with control groups. At the start of the book, Decker spent days with Boone pretending he was trying to help him find a way to disprove the murders were his doing, which of course is revealed later to have actually been him convincing him it was him enough to make a convincing confession to the police. In the book there was a, well, not a fake Midian, but an abandoned town near the graveyard that's also called Midian that most people assumed Boone was talking about when he said he wanted to go there. Everyone who saw it remarked on how nice all the buildings looked for an abandoned town. Not sure if that implied the monsters were going there at night and maintaining it, or if there was just some magic mumbo-jumbo going on. When Laurie was carrying Babette to her mother, she had to plot a course across the whole graveyard that avoided sunlight, as she quickly realised that was what was killing her. After saving her life, a psychic connection is formed between them, and Babette can occasionally draw Laurie's consciousness to her and let her see out of her eyes. She does this to ask for help from the attack at the end, and you also get a look into the life of a Nightbreed child and see they're really not all that different from human children. The film didn't bother with the religious gesture the Nightbreed made automatically when they say Baphomet's name out loud, kind of like crossing themselves. Right at the end of the book, after the Nightbreed have been fucked over so terribly, it's mentioned that in order to stay hidden while living in the human world, they restricted who they ate to just people no one would notice missing, giving the reader a confusing and slightly chilling reminder that even though these people were the victims of the story, they still, you know, kill people and eat their bodies. Okay, so the final part of this review is going to get a little weird and very sexual. First of all, the film left out Laurie going to town on herself in the hotel room because she was turned on by her innocent clean body being in such cheap, slightly dirty lodgings. Everyone has a kink, I guess. And then, when Laurie is trying to get Boone to forgive himself for existing, she doesn't just do it with love, she also does it with sex. And I am not talking about romantic sex. These two get nasty right there in the jail cell. They have angry sex, dirty, screaming, spitting in each other's faces, rutting, and Barker describes all of this in explicit detail, by the way. Excessively graphic though it is, it's not entirely without purpose or symbolism, as Boone had been unable to perform sex due to his health issues while he was human. Realising he could do it now as a Nightbreed made him feel a lot better about the whole thing. And finally, the film left out what was probably the single weirdest fucking thing from the book. Actually, scratch that, it's the weirdest fucking thing in any book. When Baphomet was renaming Boone Cabal at the end and tasking him with becoming the Nightbreed's saviour, he transforms Cabal into something a little more human than he was before, presumably so he could travel in daylight without burning up. His heart starts beating again, and well, apparently new life is shot into his testicles as well, as it makes him ejaculate, and his semen lands on Baphomet's face. He facialed an elder god. He bukkakied a lord of darkness. He gave a denizen of the underworld a pearl necklace. He war-painted an eldritch horror. He gave Baphomet the Baptizer, creator of Midian, the money shot. You really have to wonder about Clive Barker. I mean, when he sees a drawing of Cthulhu, do you think his first thought is, oh yeah, I'd love to blow my load all over those tentacles? The Dom's final thoughts. Ultimately, I found this movie disappointing, but also kind of fascinating, as it's not often you see an adaptation with exactly the same storyline as its book, but sporting such a completely different tone throughout. Due to the identity of the writer-director, the changes that occurred are obviously not the result of a new vision being forced on the story, and I also don't think they're the result of the author wanting to fix his own perceived mistakes, like with Daniel Handler in his TV show. I know I've already made this comparison a bunch of times, but this is very, very reminiscent of what goes goes wrong with Stephen King or H.P. Lovecraft film adaptations. Certain things are scary in the books because of how good the writing is, not because the thing being written about is actually all that scary. Dreadlocked lizard men are not scary, fish people are not scary, cat people are certainly not scary, hedges are not scary! Which, admittedly, isn't all that relevant, I just wanted to work it in here somewhere. When you take away the hypnotic effect Barker's words have on the reader, all that remains is some silly looking creatures and a bunch of weird psychotic redneck caricatures shooting at them. Even taking that into account, there's also the inescapable hallmarks of a director who's very talented at conveying what he wants you to feel in written form, but just doesn't have that same sort of talent when it comes to doing it visually, and ended up with something that probably wasn't as good as his original vision. I say this without judgment. It would be unreasonable to expect someone to be an amazing author and an amazing director, which is why it's probably wise to hire someone who specialises in the latter to direct your film for you. So yeah, if there's any lesson to be learned here, it's if you want your film to have a chance of being a good adaptation and a good movie, by all means let the author be involved in writing the screenplay, but maybe don't let them do everything. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. If I might remind you once again that things like ancient immortal gods of monsters with jizz on their face have nothing on the horrors of the YouTube algorithm, and clicking that like button does genuinely help protect my channel from being condemned by it. The Dom out. Hello again, my beautiful watchers. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a quick reminder that there's a wonderful website called Patreon that's been allowing online producers to actually make a living doing what they do, since apparently YouTube's decided that they shouldn't anymore. Basically, they offer the chance to pledge a certain amount of money per month or per video in exchange for various rewards offered by the creator. There's a variety of stuff you can earn by becoming one of my patrons, including early access to all videos and taking part in that survey you see at the start of every Lost in Adaptation episode. That's actually a very important part of the process, as I use it to gauge how much I'm going to need to explain about the book and the film before I start comparing them. If you decide to become a higher level contributor, your name will be added to the credits that you're seeing right now, and you'll be given the option to join my private chat room so you can regularly talk with me and other patrons. If you're keen enough to join the topmost tier of patronage, you'll earn the most coveted of all the rewards, the chance to pick a future adaptation to be reviewed by yours truly. However, if right now you are thinking, my goodness the Dom, I can't do that. A mysterious but handsome wizard wearing sunglasses informed me you're spending the money on a cannon designed to allow you to shoot puppies into the sun, and I have no reason to assume whoever that was making it up for his own amusement. Fear not, it would still be a huge help to me if you were to give that like button the old clickaroo, share this episode on social media with perhaps a little recommendation to your friends to check it out, and subscribe if you've not already. It really helps my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. I hope you have a most pleasant day, and I will see you in the next episode.